To whom it may concern, this message is one of the utmost importance. Please do not disregard it. I don't know for sure what website you'd be seeing this on. Whoever you are, probably something submission based, hopefully one where it stays up. Regardless of its impeture that you keep reading, I'll explain why soon. But before I do, here's some context in order. My brother was a brilliant man, brilliantly talented, brilliantly clever. It was difficult growing up on his shadow. We were raised in some nurturing, middle upper class environment, with two loving parents that encouraged us at every turn. But it seemed that there was nothing I could do, that he wouldn't outshine me at all. He was no savant. You see, Julian held his own situation. Rather be an exam or a party with friends. Hardly ever. He is not the smartest person in the room, or the most popular. Needless to say, I was jealous sibling. My main source of my brother's academic performance. I'm not an idiot, even in comparison to my brother, but I was an underachiever for a long period of time of my adolescence. I am not sure what I'd be attributed to. Hanging around with the wrong people, perhaps, having my head in the clouds, something like that. I've always been intelligent, but for a while I've been struggled to knuckle down and use every of that intelligent. For so long, I have heard the same expression. If only you apply yourself. I am sure some of you are reading this can relate. It wasn't until many years later that this sentiment really rang true. I outright hated Julian, but I have to admit it was unvarably growing the seed of resentment in in my heart for him, especially when we got older. His natural aptitude really started to shine. We both had an interest in computer science from a young age, mostly inherited that from our father, who worked for Microsoft before they went out of business. I still remember those nights as kids when he'd sit us down in front of his computer and show us all the little stuffs of the code that he was working on. And the other children our age would be bored out of their skulls. But there we sat, attentive as ever, our developing minds fascinated from the job's seemingly endless possibilities. Julian's other main curiosity, which I did not share, was affinity towards online horror fiction, although he grew out of that kind of stuff in his late teens. I knew I had a chip on my shoulder. Mostly he was apathetic towards it. We were never estranged, but he wasn't going to let my discontent get in the way of his success, although I don't blame him. I suppose that, as always, Julian's downfall. He was just so headstrong, too confident. When it came to the adults, we parted ways. We went on to study in Harvard, while I ended up dropping out by do some bang average local university that you never heard of. Following that, things were a little rough. My parents were fairly disappointed. They didn't cut me off, rather, interacting with them became a depressing chore that they waited for their son to get his life together. At family gatherings, I gritted my teeth at the stories Julian told, developing virtual reality hardware, cutting edge stuff, pushing the boundaries of they were interact with technology. All while I was doing was couch surfing, barely making ends meet with an it guy at a shitty school in a town I hated. It only made the prospect of snapping out of whatever haze I was feeling in more difficult. All that changed one day in the afternoon. I got my first apartment. Julian showed up out of the blue on a dewy morning with an armful of equipment and a huge, beaming smile on his face. We let him in, we talked, and promised that he was going to show me that he would completely blow my mind. I watched as he paced about my living room, setting up all his gadgety. As soon as everything was ready, he switched on my computer, handed me a thin plastic headset with exposed wires, two nods haunting from either side of the thing, which is snugly over my temples. While I sat there at the back of the sofa and started to sit there before the monitor, he gave me a simple instruction. Type something into Google. But I don't have a keyboard. You don't need one. A According to Julian's wishes, I simply thought about the action, and it happened. The word something came up in my search box, and my jaw dropped at the shock. At first, I thought the obvious, that was my brother purposely fooling me with some kind of prank or gimmick, but I repeated the tests, all came up with the same result, and it was all just searching I could do telepathically, but anything, literally anything I could think of, limited to the capabilities of the computer, of course. I had total control. There was even a sort of projection in my mind's eye that was happening, like the process was actually occurring inside my brain. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't nothing out of amazing. "You're one of the first people to try it," he told me. "I tested everything out. We're calling it NeuroWorks or something like that to effect." I don't think that feeling of astonishment ever really left me. It was then I realized my petty indignation, the dissatisfaction I felt over the years of being outcast, meant that there was nothing in the face of my brother's achievements, and him and I would be doing the exact same disservice by failing to assist him. Julian departed that night sometime after a few drinks and laughs, and the next day I enrolled once again for pretty much a degree in computer science. 4 years later, I passed flying colors, and Julian hired me to work for him at his company. There may be a bit of Neapolitanism involved, but not neither here or there. The next few days were dizzying. During the time in which I was getting re-educated, Julian had me working with a team like elite neuroscientists, specialists that filled in the gaps of his knowledge and did all the things he couldn't immediately. I felt as if it was way in over my head. I was learning the advance. I gradually got up to speed, and my mood improved quite rapidly. That feeling of pride, like I was finally doing something productive with my life, was nothing sort of fantastic, especially the face of so many wasted years. I was never quite on with Julian's level, of course, but it was enough time. I grew to be valued contributor, and with the NeuroWorks project, off the back of a long period of arduous work, the device fully came into fruition, accumulating in the international commercial release. It was a global success. We made a fortune. Once we fully optimized it, it ended up being surprisingly cheap to produce and implement. The result of its adoption in billions of households and businesses as expected. It was completely changed the way we live and work in the viral world, worldwide productively, and efficiently increased it tenfold. Even now I'm still typing this message with those two with the same nodes attached either side of my hands-free head, and as cliched as it sounds. At that point, it truly felt like we were living the future. Honestly, I would have been happy to stop there. I would have been moved on to green and sunny, spent the rest of my days doing the TED Talks, slipping cocktails in the balcony of my villa, not even giving a single damn. But not Julian. Like always, Julian had his eyes set further horizons on the subsequent stretch of progress. No sooner than a few months after the NeuroWorks was released, he did come up with his next significant idea: consciousness splicing. That was how he described it on that day, the first day down to try and explain. We were outside a cafe, some pretentious, gentrified establishment in the heart of London, with a coffee each. The next stage of human learning, or maybe its existence for a while. NeuroWorks compared to this. "It's just a stepping stone, Alex," he told me. "If we get this right, we won't let it to be able to use our computers with our minds. We'll be able to think like them too." I struggled to wrap my head around the concept. "How do you mean exactly?" I replied. "Take what makes us scientists, our minds and our passion, our free will, everything a machine lacks. How can it be improved? How can it be bettered? What lack naturally, as we species, I mean we could be found in the computer, the processing power, the boundless memory, the objectivity, not even to mention the ability to conjure up some kind of information on with whim. the entire collective library of the human knowledge, dating back thousands of years. But there were limitations. Computers that can't fully trust them think for themselves. Not yet. Anyway, they required an input direction. If we can intersect the strengths of a man and machine across the gap that separates us. He was a stirring and he was drink all the while. Julian had a thing for that. He would have never looked at you directly when he was thinking, like the image of your baffled face that would put him off somehow. Okay, but you're talking purely theoretical terms, right? We're centuries off reaching that point. I mean, creating our neural link between a passion and Mac OS is the one thing. I think it's possible. A beat that passed before he sighed, grabbed a napkin. He produced a pen from his pocket. I waited as he sketched out a crude yet complicated diagram. I can't recall it exactly, but it had something to do with the relationship between me, space, and information. Far more physiological than scientific. I remember thinking, the internet is a powerful beast. Our means of controlling it, accessing it, even with the neural works, are subpar. We just need another breakthrough. And then what could happen the door for knows what else. Traversing through decades online, going back and forth whenever we want. Easier said than done. But that could be possible. It could. I disagree. Not in our lifetimes, anyway. And even if, as it sounds, it's dangerous, very dangerous, the number of things that could go wrong, the variabilities, it doesn't bear thinking about it. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's learn to walk before we run, eh? He was quiet after that. The conversation struck with me for the next couple of years. We are now working on mostly in maintaining NeuroWorks at this time, delivering a steady stream of updates and enhancements of society began to mold itself into around the evident. There was some discussion when to the next leap forward as it would be, the next huge announcement from Julian's company, but he remained tight-lipped about anything regarding that. It was then when he started acting weird. I saw him less and less in what's supposed to be in our spare time together. The cancellation reservations, a missed family events added up, but whatever I asked him about it, he just shrugged it off. I'm a workaholic, he would say. You know all the world mean to me, so does this job. I tried to comfort myself that, but deep down I know what he was hiding. Something. Something he thought that would worry me. That was outside the area of my expertise. I was going to confront him about it eventually. I just ended up waiting for too long. One night he ran me out of nowhere. I remember shooting straight up into a sitting position in a pitch black room. I think I'd been having a nightmare. The metallic surface on my phone was cold and smooth on my sweaty palms as I picked up the call and pressed it onto my temple. Meet me at the address in a half an hour, and be quick. I spoke a word to him in no return. The call had already ended, but there was a soft blip, and there was some PAL postcode. I couldn't recognize it appeared that was on top of the screen. Doing exactly as my brother asked, I got up, changed, and made a 20-minute journey by car. The place was a rundown warehouse of one of the rougher areas of town, where property prices were at their cheapest. I parked up and stepped outside, shivering as I cursed myself for not having a foresight of bringing a thicker jacket. I wasn't immediately obvious which building I was looking for, until I saw a flash of light right through the broken window in the distance. Cautiously, I approached it, glancing around to assure myself that I wasn't walking into a trap. As stupid as I thought it was, the main door being completely boarded up, meaning an obscure gap in the brickwork was my entry point. Dodging any tiny droplets of water trickling down from the broken ceiling, I rounded the corner. The main spaculaous area of the warehouse had been skidded out as some sort of makeshift workshop, near identical to the setup of the NeuroWorks. It was as if someone had carved out one of the labs, dumped it there. Beside the walls, crumpling paint, my brow furrowed, and I stared at it in the distance from the scurrying scientists who flicked me awkwardly looks as they went on tending to their central apparatus. I recognized just a few of them. They pay me a little mind. I'm sure they knew I was coming. It took me several moments to realize, but Julian was part of the almighty cluster from the machine in the middle hill at all. His body was biological clog, otherwise an artificial setup. He was on his back. He headed out titled slightly forwards. Arms splayed in a T pose as he was being crucified. I never got that image out of my head, of him lying there, not having quite noticed me yet. At top of his shaved head, there was next to the monitor, where wires came down dangling clumps off to the side of the bed. He was on and fed into his garnigation hunk by the steel at the side. It was truly massive, toppled with the blinking lights and seemingly missing its outer casting. If I didn't know better, I'd assumed that he'd been kidnapped and had experimented on. He looked at me directly upwards from his perspective and said, "You're late," through a smile. I wasn't smiling, Julian. What the fuck is all this? I apologize for not telling you sooner. Truth to be told, I didn't want you to worry, but this is too important for you to see. I was at a loss for words. What we were going to do here today, right now, will change the course of humanity, and you need to be here to witness it. So get ready. We're starting. He shouted at the last sentence, and all the scientists in the room shuffled to what only could be described as their posts. I merely watched as they watched down, started a countdown sequence of shorts, doubtfully coordinating the machine through the large control panel. They communicated with the short, snappy gestures and mumbled the technobabble that I could barely pay attention to. Instinctively, I stepped back until I was at the arbitrarily safe distance. Seconds later, my mouth only turned dry. Quiet ringing from my ears began to form. I chalked it up the nerves intentionally, but before it became apparent here, there was some kind of static in the air, palpable interference that manifested the painful shock as my hand grazed the edge of the work surface. It seemed to be estimating from the middle of nowhere in the room, where Julian was. His eyes were closed now. Tightly, he said the great impression of someone concentrating was very intentionally on something. There was a hum, so low that you can almost feel it before you heard it, slowly increasing in pitch. I suddenly had a headache, and I was almost certain my hair was standing up underneath the confines of my flat cap. Panic surfaced within me as I noticed the scientists arguing. I shouted out a word of protest, only to realize that my head had been popped, and the faint ringing from Ernow earlier sounded like a cacophonous bound of tetanus. It was something that I clearly uttered wrong. Julian's deathly stillness had honed the thoughts and had ended, and now he was thrashing around, foaming at the mouth, unable to break free of his confines. I ran back over to his side. "Don't touch me!" he began to force out. I could barely hear him, but the crazed look in his eyes, dilated like a cat's, convinced me to leave him alone. Instead, I focused my attention on the scientists. "What are you maniacs doing to him?" I yelled. "Fucking switch that thing off right now." One of them came and pushed me away. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't make out any words. The noise of the machine was just too loud. There was a collective moment of fear, and his tone became ear-splitting. No one could hear anyone anymore. Julian looked at me like he was being possessed. My attention was almost drawn by the monitor beside him, before it could be inherent, but it was currently displaying fast-moving, almost psychotic kaleidoscope uniform shape of colors. If you've ever seen that computer, it looks like when you move its RAM while it's running. It's like that, but even more erratic and animated, and I was practically hypnotized by it. As I gazed further and further into the depths, an awful image began to emerge. It was Julian. I swear to God it sounds crazy, but Julian's face materialized in the form of this nightmarish concealance of text in his code. His mouth was open, his eyes were bulging out of his skull. I turned to my brother to see what he was exactly doing with the same expression that there was on the table. Unable to breathe, it made me sick to my stomach. Suddenly, the machine shut down, taking the monitor display, oppressive interference with it. Julian's eyes gazed over, and his face went as pale as a sheet. He slumped down onto his back, letting out a huge exhale. It was then, when he didn't take another breath, that two coated men went to check on his pulse. A single head shook between them, confirmed what I feared. Gone. I think it was in shock the whole rest of the night, because I didn't speak a word to anyone until the morning. They sent me down in the taxi and promised to take care of what had happened. I burst into furious, bitter tears as I put the keys in the door. I was so angry at being kept in the dark, lied to for so long. But with this having the accumulation, little did I know that it was just the beginning. Julian's team called me into work the next day for a private meeting to maintain the company's work and appearance. They were going to sweep the whole thing under the rug. Figures. I remember thinking my first urge, naturally, was to fight this burial, to expose them and bring them the sense of justice. But I was talked down from it. You might want to call me cowardly for that, but put yourself in my shoes for a minute. I had no real evidence at hand, and it had become so apparent that the scientists were only operating under my brother's command. Everything had been panned out as advance, even the system that was being followed for now, for what would have happened if a fatal accident occurred, telling the world of events that it might have been losing a battle. Already, they'd already cleaned up their mess, demolishing the warehouse lab, scrubbing all the evidence from the archives, etc. It was a tough call, but I felt compelled to adhere my brother's wishes and kept moving forward with the neural works. You could judge me if you want, but I don't care. I forgave him over time. It wasn't their fault that Julian had died that night. There had been a freak malfunction in the equipment, leading them to unable to turn it off. I don't go into depth, but there is a lot about it that I don't understand to this day. Anyway, once the dust had settled, we put the incident behind us, gave up the whole cutting edge angle for a while. We started pursuing safer technological adventures like media creation, but that was something strange began happening. You see, Julian's death may cause us obviously intentionally, but it was likely a heart attack or stress related or neurosome. But the autopsy revealed something startling. There was little to no internal damage anywhere in his body, no burst of blood vessels or spasmed arteries. After all, the electrical signals in his body had simply vanished simultaneously, deactivating his brain. It was as if he had literally had no bin to shut off. After this got out, of course, NeuroWorks is now one of the most valuable, powerful companies of all time. Made sure that Julian's death was publicly credited to stroke due to undetected high cholesterol levels. But it's certainly interesting considering what came after. Over the next few weeks, the virus, we had troubles. A malicious software was making its way through the computer system. There was a bit of panic to begin with an internal investigation revealed we had far into our computer system and far unsecured data that anyone was working at the market competitor and would be happy to steal and sell the highest bidder. But the more found out about it, but the more curious we become. The strange thing about the only partly of what it did, corruption and deletion of a pretty bog standard, far from as viruses go. But as the effects were largely patternless, like it was picking items at a complete random, but it was so when it was doing it. After some research, we found out that people have been complaining about this mystery malware. They have been designated as worst star due to the word apparently repeating itself over and over again. Damaged code, text boxes, since the beginning of the internet. Despite its existence, it had never been documented anywhere, which is extremely bizarre. Whatever Weird Star is, it's completely transcendent of time. We think we know what's going on, though we had our ideas to begin with, and there were plenty of skeptical among us, but in recent years, it's all been verified about it. A couple of months ago, I found a .text file. It was on my computer that it wasn't there the day before. It was entitled Worst Star Gift. It was the enormous mass of code that took at least fully weeks to analyze, developing the nitty-gritty of the whole thing that would take forever, but the form of what we've been able to glean it from, and I promise I'm being serious when I say this, it's a formula for communicating virtually in the past. Which brings us to today, well, our day, sending this message from the year 2050 to what we're been calculated as the mid 2010s. Myself and Julian should only be only little children. Oh, don't worry. This isn't some Terminator style mission to erase or alter the timeline. We just need us to tell you something. The code isn't the only thing within the text file. There was a message. A message we can't read. It's been cobbled up together in an old, outdated editor that isn't compatible with the modern NeuroWorks setup anymore. Believe me, we tried everything. But not even our computer files display it. We think it's failure to view for this whole reason. We're able to even talk to you now. In your whole time, we should be still eligible. You may need to do something with it. View it through the source editor. Perhaps maybe it won't be hard to picture. You should be able to communicate with us too. Hopefully, we've tested this on random forums. Dozens of messages that were made supposedly sent in 2012, and the people responded to them the same year, as well as the danger associated with this. But at this time, it's only the chance we've got. I'm going to wrap this up by apologizing. I'm sorry that I haven't been more specific throughout this message. There is a lot I have glossed out over the pursuit, keeping things relatively short. Maybe this is just some lost cause. The technology we're still using is extremely unrefined, so there is this chance that it may not ever get out there. It's been 10 years since Julian died, and I give anything to be able to see my brother again. If this works, if we're able to somehow establish content, but I guess we may even reverse the process to find the human host. So please, for the love of God, please, what does it say? Where is Julian?